The Congressional Budget Office found that caps on medical malpractice lawsuits could save more than $4 billion over the next decade. Are malpractice lawsuits destroying the healthcare system? That is the subject of our face-off debate tonight. Joining us, Dr. Jeffrey Siegel, he's founder and CEO of Medical Justice, and Alan Ripka, a medical malpractice attorney. Good to have you both with us.
Hello.
Well,
Thank you.
In numbers, medical malpractice, and if we may, let's show these numbers. Medical malpractice claims and insurance premiums make up just about 1% of total health care costs. But the AMA estimates that so-called defensive medicine, a direct result of those malpractice lawsuits, costing us $151 billion. Let me start, if I may, with you, Dr. Siegel. What's your reaction?
My reaction is that number, 150 billion, may actually be an underestimate. I can tell you that next year, 50,000 doctors will receive a letter stating, hey, look, you've been sued. Once you've been sued, that will change the doctor's behavior from then on. And what is the cost? The cost is anywhere between $100 to $200 billion of unnecessary tests just to keep the doctor from sitting in a witness chair ever again. That amount of money would allow us to purchase a health insurance policy for every uninsured American, pay for health information technology, and have some change left over.
All right, Alan Ripka, your thoughts?
I completely disagree. When we talk about defensive medicine, we're talking about saving lives. They're calling it defensive medicine, but what it really is doing the appropriate tests so that doctors and nurses and healthcare providers could be checking on all the possibilities that may be going wrong with the patient. And they're not going to know unless they do those tests. And the reason medical malpractice exists is because those tests aren't done and people die. And you're not talking about death here, you're talking about money. And obviously lives are much more important.
You couldn't quarrel with that, could you, doctor?
Well, I think patient safety is really important, but most of the tests that are being done related to defensive medicine provide absolutely zero value to the patient. They keep the doctor out of the witness chair. A small amount of testing will improve the patient's condition, and a small amount of testing, paradoxically, will actually make the patient even worse than before you started. But by and large, defensive medicine is exactly that.
May I interrupt you? Did you just say testing could make the patient worse off?
Exactly. Imagine sticking a needle in the patient just because you're curious to make sure, just 1,000% sure, that you've not missed anything. Once you stick a needle in the patient's body, anything can happen. The lung can drop, bleeding, infection, the list goes on and on.
Alan Ripka?
And obviously not sticking the needle into the person's body and not drawing that blood doesn't tell you whether or not the person has an infection or has a disease or something that would be detected in a lab or blood test. So where are you going with that? You're allowing someone to die so you don't have to pay for the blood test?
I would never argue let's allow someone to die, but here we can deal with facts. For example, if a person has a minor head injury, they lose consciousness, go to the emergency room, every doctor will order a CT scan. We now know we can ask 5 basic questions to make sure the patient does not go home with a blood clot in the head. But today, in this country, every ER physician will scan every patient that comes through. In fact, one ER doc said, I will scan people till they glow if it keeps me out of a jury, in front of a jury.
Well, that issue then becomes the cost of defensive medicine. It sounds like there are a host of issues. I was talking with a doctor in Houston recently on the air who said that doctors right now are really getting out of the art of examination because they are forced defensive medicine to run so many tests that they're not carrying out, examinations properly. What do you think of that, Alan, first?
Well, I think, first of all, it shouldn't be called defensive medicine. It should be called appropriate medicine. And with these doctors who are being sued, they've deemed it defensive medicine to put a stigma on it. Doing a lot of tests to determine something is not necessarily inappropriate. Deciding which ones are appropriate and which ones are not are left for the medical community. And they're the ones who make those determinations. And if they've determined that not doing certain tests is okay, they've caused the problem in not diagnosing the issue to begin with.
Doctor?
Well, a legislation is being proposed. We're a member of an organization called Center for Health Transformation. Physicians would be held to be immune, given a safe harbor, if they followed practice guidelines, if they followed appropriate best practices. And the question is, would plaintiff attorneys get behind that? If a doctor documents
would you, Alan?
Well, right now, in every court of law that I've practiced in, and I try medical malpractice cases regularly, if a doctor does not what they call depart from the appropriate standard of care, and the jury determines that, he or she is not responsible. So it's not about us lawyers getting on board with that. The courts have made that decision.
There's one lawyer who says absolutely there will be no cap of medical malpractice suits. As we've been examining here on this broadcast, in every country that we have examined, and particularly in Europe, where there is universal health care, where there is a national health care system, there's no role for medical malpractice lawsuits, and in those countries where there is, it's minimal. What's your reaction to that, gentlemen?
Well, I would say that that is the one thing we can emulate from other countries. We could adopt the British system. I mean, there's very little to be desired in the National Health Service, the British system, but one thing they do right is something called loser pay. It means that they do have a professional liability system, but to the extent that a person brings a case, if they get it wrong, the loser has to pay.
That sounds fair. Alan Ripka?
Well, our system has advantages, and just because people do it other ways doesn't mean we always have to adopt those ways.
Well, no, I wasn't. By the way, no one is suggesting anybody has to. We're an egalitarian operation here. I'm all about democracy. You know, we want people to decide that.
Well, in our case, what we have is, because there's no caps, and let's say here, let's say in New York, for example, these doctors are on guard, as they should be. There are consequences to actions in every livelihood. And if you don't take care of what you're supposed to do properly, there could be a penalty. You may have to pay. And you cannot value someone's pain and suffering, and you cannot predetermine what the costs are going to be to keep that person alive and well and taken care of.
Well, one could argue, could they not, Alan, that in other countries they value life and limbs so highly that they would not attempt to put a price on it?
Well, they may not, but maybe in those countries, they allow doctors, by paying doctors, and I'm all for this, the money to do all the tests that need to be done. And maybe medical malpractice isn't quite as prevalent because they are doing a great job at diagnosing, examining, and treating patients that are sick.
Whoa, 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 wait a minute. So are you suggesting that other countries are better at patient safety than we are in the United States?
No, I'm simply saying that if, in fact, doctors are being paid for certain testing that they may not be being paid for here, they easily can get to the diagnosis.
I think you're both ready for opening arguments in the next case. We thank you very much for being with us and shedding some light and some insight into this. We appreciate it. Alan, thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you.